So everyone knows we're recording. Yeah, I think that's everything. So I'm going to pass it over to Liz now, and I'm going to spotlight her for everybody and meet myself.
First of all, I want to thank you, Carrie, for inviting me and to all of Cabbage. And Carrie, I really want to come to your studio. It looks like a lot of fun. But I also want to thank everybody who has attended tonight via Zoom. This is just great. So I'm really, really happy to talk to you about some of the things that have inspired me and helped me move along in my practice. I did want to mention Sigrid and the JPP, as she did such a nice job of highlighting some of my artist books. And I also want to give a couple of specific thank yous to people like Rose Newlove, who taught me probably 3 or 4 workshops and really helped me understand a lot of the fundamentals of bookbinding, although I don't at all pretend to understand the real hardcore bookbinding. I'm just a novice. But she really made it approachable. And many of the Cabbage workshop leaders did the same, like Gabrielle Lumdine came and did one night. We did some really fun pocket things, and Barb came and taught me how to make my own cradle. So there's so many people along the way that I really have a great debt of gratitude to. So thank you. Okay, so now Carrie's going to help me make sure I do this correctly. Please bear with me. I'm not really techie, but I'll do my best. Carrie, are we good to go?
Yes. Is everybody seeing stuff? Anybody, if they're sad, say something in the chat. I think we're good.
Okay, terrific. There's another group of instructors I'd like to thank, and those are the people that I have had the privilege of learning from when I've gone to paper and book intensive at Oxbow School of the Arts in Michigan. PBI is great, and it's an intensive Cabbage experience that really is also a wonderful way of learning book arts and meeting people that share the same passion. So thank you very much for inviting me to do this talk. I'm going to try really hard to make things work here. What I've learned about artist talks is that they're often a way for me to revisit my own work, and often I generate new ideas, which is really exciting, and it's an offshoot that I never expect. And as I'm pulling together things for a talk, ideas just start happening. So that's a really exciting offshoot. I am primarily known as a printmaker. I do a lot of printmaking in different types of media within printmaking, but I'm increasingly becoming known as a book artist because I really love working with books. So that's a picture of me down at Open Studio. The plates that you see on that table are photo etching plates. I primarily do hand-drawn work, but that was sort of a foray into that, and I may do more of that kind of work. Here's the printmaking techniques I will briefly outline tonight, because all 4 of these techniques have been used in the artist books I'm going to talk about. The top left-hand corner is copper plate etching. And you'll see that plate is actually about 18 by 24 inches. You'll see that the first thing I do when preparing a plate is shine it to an almost mirror finish. I start with about an 800 grit wet dry sandpaper. Then I go up to 1200, then 1500. And by the time I'm at the end of it, I'm using a 2000 grit sandpaper. I then put a resist on top of my copper plate that's asphaltum, beeswax, and a little bit of India ink. And I paint that on. So when that waxy resist dries, then I take my etching needle, which is just like a pen, and I start to draw. And everywhere that my needle penetrates the resist, When I put that into a bath of ferric chloride, which is a benign salt, my doggy's misbehaving, then the ferric chloride eats away or etches the metal. So you'll see some of the black bits, that's an aquatint, and so are the lighter bits, but that's the basic process for intaglio or copper plate etching. To the right is a reduction woodcut. This is not like mokuhangu. This is a different technique. I don't know mokuhangu. I've never done it, or mokuhanga, my apologies. But this is where you use a wood board, and the wood of choice is called Shina wood. It's a Japanese wood that McLean's in Oregon sell. It's very soft, and it's beautiful for doing reduction woodcuts. The bottom left is collograph. Collograph is where you have a substrate that's, it could be plexi, it could be some kind of I call this stuff carton. It's like a very heavy cardboard, but like a Bristol board, but it's a combination. And I like to build the surface up. And my favorite things to use are string, sand, and glue. So they're really low tech. But I'll show you more about that when we get going. And the fourth technique is screen printing. And you can see in this image, you just see a little bit of the screen printing, but I used cursive handwriting, and you put a photo emulsion on a screen, you expose that photosensitive screen to light, then you remove the emulsion and you print through what's remaining. So those are the four techniques in particular that I will be talking about tonight. So how did it begin? Well, I started making what I called itsy bitsy pocketbooks. And this is just serendipity. There was a scrap of leftover copper because I had cut a plate smaller. And being the frugal person from a Scottish mother that I am, I couldn't just let it sit. So I started to doodle on it after I had put my hard ground. And I doodled all those little trees along the shoreline. And then just by happenstance, I found strips of kozo, that beautiful handmade Japanese paper. There'd been a custom print job done, and they had trimmed the paper, and they were in the scrap paper bin, and I took them, and they were the perfect size for this new plate I'd done. So the next thing was to figure out how to do an accordion book. And then Sherry Moot was offering a class, and it was the Mishi folded covers. So that's where I went. That's what I did. And I think I have made at least 400 of these little itsy bitsy pocketbooks. They're super labor intensive, but there's something quite charming about them, even though I get cross at myself halfway through making them because there's so much work. Anyway, so that's sort of how it all got started. But I also have to add, there was another funny little story. Nancy Jacoby asked me to go to Hamilton for her to do some teaching at the calligraphy conference. And I went in and I said who I was and why I was there. And the woman said, well, take a number. And I said, no, I'm not a participant. I'm, doing this to teach. Oh, take one anyway. It's fun. And it was a grab bag thing. Well, my number got called, and the prize I wanted was still there. And it was a 1-year membership to Cabbage. So it was great. That was another happenstance, wonderful beginning. So there's my itsy bitsy books. My bookbinding career and printmaking career really started to take off when I was awarded the Nick Novak Fellowship. It's a 1-year fellowship at Open Studio. You have a year's free access to the studio. There's a budget for some professional development. And then you have a solo exhibition in the main gallery. And these are pictures from my major exhibition. My focus was on Toronto's Don River. And I knew as of July that I had the fellowship, but it didn't start till September. So I started wandering the Don River, and I photographed and I sketched and I walked and walked and walked. And I also then did primary research at the Ontario Archives, and I read a lot of written accounts like Scatting and Charles Soriel and all these people that had written extensively about the Don. I was really, really happy with all the two-dimensional work I did. I was talking about the the plant material and the built material. I took a piece of copper, and it was a 3x5 foot piece, and I drew an imaginary Don River prior to any kind of contact. So it was all the lost rivers and all the marshes and all the twists and turns. And I printed that onto linen and had the linen upholstered onto 2 chairs that had been my mother's. So that was a really fun part of the project to me. But I still really wanted to do an artist book, and I had kept copious notes of what I'd done and where I'd been and quotes. And I just couldn't seem to get the whole thing conceptually to gel. So one day I just happened to be at the Ontario Archives, and I was going through the Sorial papers and other papers, and I found the original of this map that you're seeing on the screen. And this was an 1888 pre-channelization map of the Don River. And this particular image that you're seeing is a smaller image I did. The one, I'm going to go back if that'll work. You'll see one in the back corner there that's similar. That is a 56-inch long etching on Mura Utaban Itabashi that I folded up like we fold maps. And it has all the lot numbers and everything. So it was really quite precise. That map was what gave me the focus to do a limited edition artist book, because I then was able to look at all these twists and turns and apply the knowledge I had gained from reading and wandering to create the story. But it took till January, and I was starting to think, oh, I'll never get an artist book done. And then once I decided kind of what I wanted to do, I had to do the math. And math isn't my best friend. So trying to figure out how to make all this work. And I should say, I wrote original prose, and I didn't get down to the nitty-gritty of planning the actual book probably until June. I just, this was really, really challenging for me anyway. But there's some of my earlier ways of figuring out, what am I going to need? If it's a 60-inch long book, 6x9, this is what I'm going to need. And so I was doing all this math. Now, I was really, really lucky, because somewhere along the line, I had met Reg Beatty, and I phoned him and said, would you be interested in binding this book for me if I can get it made? And he said, sure, come on over and we'll talk. So he helped me figure out, how to build the accordion, how much space I'd need to fix the pages, one to each. And then I had to figure out myself exactly what I wanted to do. So if you look at the middle image on this Nature of the River slide, Nature of the River is what I called the book. And if you look closely, that's me that's the inked plate. That plate is 56 inches long. And you'll see there are joins all the way down that aren't really joins, but it's where the Mura Utaban Itabashi overlaps so that we could bind it together. I hope I'm making sense when I say this, because that's where the accordion joins were made. So I had to figure out exactly how the etching itself would sit on the page and look like it was connected. But then I also had to figure out how to do the handset letterpress type so that it would read properly and the whole thing would come together. So you're seeing the middle page, or the middle image is the Mura Utaban Itabashi on the copper plate. The top right-hand image is me wiping the plate prior to putting that paper on it. Directly below that is the handset letterpress type from on my Vandercook that I had to use to print the image. And I had to set it for each section of the book because it was all different type. The other thing I want to point out to you is if you look at the copper plate, we're at the first image now on the far left. If you look at the copper plate and you look at the book beneath it, you can see that the copper plate and the book match. Well, if you've done any etching, you know that that's actually not possible. when you do etching, you're actually doing the reverse. So when I had my book done and I realized how I wanted to display it, and I wanted to display it with the copper plate, I realized that most people wouldn't understand if I actually used the right plate. So I had to go into the studio and make what I would call a fake plate so that people would think it would make sense to them that this was the copper plate used. And it really looks great. And if you'd seen it with the other, you'd say, oh yeah, no, there was no option here. But that's the backstory to this book. And this was a limited edition of 30. This is the collector's version. And in fact, the number 1 of 30 is in the Toronto Region Conservation Authority's boardroom, which is a real honor. And it's been quite widely collected, and I'm quite in awe of how far this book has traveled and gone. And so the next picture shows a second way of showing the book. And in fact, I was invited to show the work at Evergreen Brickworks, and that's how I showed it in the case down there. Now, to the right of that, you're going to see what I call the popular edition. And I want to thank Michelle Walker for suggesting this to me, because she said, this is what we've done with George's books, and I think it would really translate nicely for yours as well. So this, I took a computer, I guess what I scanned parts of the book and photographed and stitched it all together with the help of a photographer. And then we had this one long digital file, which I took to a printer, not a printmaker, but a printer. And he would print these for me. And there were like five per sheet. And he would cut them on his cutter. And then I brought them home and I folded them. And then I made these covers, as you see in the image. Those are one of David's beautiful Saint Armand papers. And I created this fold where the front part of the accordion is tucked into the front cover. The back part can be tucked into the back cover or not. And it's folded in such a way so that it looks like it has a spine. So that was a pretty fun project. And I've certainly folded so many of those books, I can't even tell you. And it's really been quite successful. Like whenever I take these to little shows, people always buy them. They either buy them for gifts or for stocking stuffers, or when they're going to someone's house for dinner, they often take it as a thank you gift for dinner. And I've had some really, really interesting stories told to me by people who live along the trajectory of that part of the river. So that's been a really neat thing that I never anticipated. But again, between, Reg Beatty and, I meant to mention too, Will Reuter, he used the same paper for his collector's edition. And I looked at that carefully and thought, oh yeah, this is beautiful. So that was also an inspiration for my choice of paper. So there's been a lot of people who have fabulous expertise that are here in Ontario that we're really, really lucky to have them. So that's the two, the collector's edition and the popular edition. So the next book I did, I called it A View from 16A, which was my seat on Via Rail. And it was the Toronto to Montreal Via Rail trip. And it's a series of etchings and dry point that are done on copper. It is printed on Somerset, which is a cotton rag paper. It's a good printmaking paper. And this was the first one I actually did totally by myself from start to finish. Not just the printing of it and the organizing, but also the binding and the end papers and the cover, the front cover, the back cover, the whole 9 yards. So I just include that because, this is meant to be a talk where, I go into the why I make them, the stories behind making them, and the processes and techniques. So I'm trying to cover off all my bases here for you. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. So this is, as I said, that trip. So the next thing I want to talk about is the next book that I did that was really not a book per se, but more of a scroll. And I'm showing the image on the left because it's a really good example of how I make my collagraphs. The one on the left was actually for an exhibition up at the Agnes Jameson Gallery. And I did a series of 9 collagraph panels that I hand printed on silk organza and suspended them from the ceiling. And then in behind were a series of 9 of the same image on BFK Reeves that were affixed to the wall. But this is what I mean when I say I like to use really simple things to make my collagraphs. So that's just plain old sand and white glue. And I'm sorry, I have to cough. So I'm going to try and mute myself for a minute here. I apologize. No, wrong thing. I hit the wrong thing. Sorry. My apologies. I just came back from a trip and I had the worst flipping cold. It's not COVID, but so I do apologize. Okay, so the one on the right is a collagraph plate.
So Liz, your screen share isn't on.
Okay, thank you. That's kind of important.
Yeah.
Okay, share content. How are we now?
Let's give it a second to I'm still seeing you. Here we go.
Are we back
right.
up?
We're back up, I think. It's just coming. It's loading.
Okay, yeah, that little ball's going around and around and around.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me know when we're clear.
Yeah, we're back in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any questions so far?
I haven't seen anything in the chat yet. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Hopefully people are storing them up.
Okay, so what you're seeing on the right-hand side is my basement studio, and you're seeing a collagraph plate that has just been printed. What you see on the roller is a print. I created a series of 6 of these collagraphs. And what I'm doing with this piece of work is I'm taking E. Pauline Johnson's the poem Sings, and I turned it into something that was like it been written on a birch tree with children's, handwriting. So that was the objective of this. And it turned out I ended up making 9 of these pieces that, floor to ceiling. And everyone is different because I played around with the placement of the letterpress type as well as the collagraph itself. So I'm showing you all this stuff, kind of trying to blow your minds as to all the things you can be doing with books. And they don't have to be high tech. You don't have to do etchings. You can do dry point. You can do collagraph. You can do things with a wooden spoon. So, I'm just trying to sort of show you how much fun these things can be, but, how basic they also can be. So that's the collagraph. And here's the work on exhibit. So you can see that's just 5 of the 9, but you can see how what's really this piece of cardboard with some glue and some sand and some string turns into something quite magical. And the first time I exhibited this work was at the Grimsby Public Art Gallery, and Rona put it in the far corner, and it really looked like a grove of trees. And as you got closer, you didn't realize that it was hand set letterpress type, but you knew that somebody had written on these birch trees. So to me, that's a non-traditional book, but it's still a book. And to the right, there's a detail of some of the distress pieces I did on top of it to make it look like bark peeling off the tree. So after that, I then went to public PBI, Paper and Book Intensive. As I said, it's at Oxbow School of the Arts. I highly recommend this. In fact, I don't know if anybody here knows Victoria Cowan, but she's the one who said to me, Liz, you've got to go to PBI. Okay, fine. Whenever anybody tells me I should do something, I just do it because I figured, hey, they know I'm happy to go along. Well, I was super, super, super lucky. And I mean that because you are allowed to pick 3 things you want to do. and I hadn't gotten into any of the 3 things I asked for. And I got an email the day before saying someone dropped out. They had the same choice as you have. You are now in the 3 classes you wanted to be in. And the one class was an intensive 5-day class with Karen Kunk, who I'm sure you all know her beautiful books. So we knew each other from seeing each other at printmaking conferences in the States, but we really had a lot of fun that week. And what you're seeing in the top left-hand corner is one of the plates that I carved. And it was Karen who introduced me to Sheena Wood and her method of printing for her gorgeous books. And these are color reduction woodcuts, but in a non-traditional way. The plate underneath that is actually a collagraph plate that I made later, but I wanted to show it to you because you can see how a piece of paper was used as a resist. So that this is the technique that Karen taught. You can roll up your plate with inks and then put something over top to act like a resist or a mask, and then you print, and only what is visible prints on your paper. So the top right-hand corner shows these pieces that I started to really play with. And to me, this particular technique is pure play. It's really quite fun. It's liberating. There's no addition in the sense of an etching where, you know, you want to make sure that certain etchings are all the same in the addition. This is just sort of let loose. And the bottom right-hand corner is my very first case-bound book. And I did it with Karen. That was part of the class, but most people didn't bother. So she was really, really generous and really helpful. And I was beyond excited. And I ended up actually going on to make an edition of 5. And because I had no intention of either book looking like the other than that it was the same matrix, the same size, I called it a varied edition. And so each one is very, very different within that edition. But it's multiple layers. And Karen uses very, very transparent inks, which I think is also part of the appeal. And this was printed on Kizuke kozo, the same kozo that are used by the Inuit artists for all of their beautiful works. So it's a gorgeous paper. And if I remember correctly, this is the book that Sigrid, one of my books that she was profiling when she talked a month ago. And this is in Nancy's collection. So, and it is lovely because the paper, you turn it over and you see right through the paper. It's so beautifully translucent. So that was another little, so the next thing that happened was, and I only made that one book until later. The next thing that happened was there was an open studio call for an exhibition. They called it Myths and Legends. And so I thought, oh, you know, like these things really kind of tear at my brain. And luckily I have about 6 months to come up with something. And what I came up with was when I was a kid, I used to go to the Rouge Park all the time before it was even a conservation area. And of course, there's this trestle bridge and the trains go over it. And everybody always dared everybody to go up on the trestle bridge. And I never knew anyone who actually did it. But when I thought, okay, a myth and a legend, okay, then there's a legend that the ghost plants growing underneath this trestle bridge are actually people who got killed in the middle of the night walking along the train tracks when they weren't supposed to be doing it. And the ghost plants are their souls trying to say, here I am, come and get me, sort of thing. So that's how my forest floor grave came about. And you can see on the right-hand side, the little ghost plants, which are in fact Monotropa uniflora, peeking out. So that was actually very successful. And I've exhibited that work in a number of different places. And it's kind of a fun thing because especially when it's on a hardwood floor or a concrete floor, people are actually afraid to walk on it because they think they're all real leaves and they don't want to disturb things. But in fact, they're all handmade Japanese paper. So that part sort of got me thinking further. What happened next was there was something on the Book Hearts listserv. And I talk about this a lot whenever I teach. Anybody who isn't on the Book Hearts listserv out of Syracuse University, it's Peter Vennigan, I think I could never pronounce his name properly. He started this about 30 years ago. It's incredibly low tech. There's no images. I think you can do links now, but really this is just email. And it's anything Book Hearts. And I have met people, learned things. In fact, I just went to Morocco and I put it out to the print serve list. I said, is there anything I should be doing in Morocco? And I got some wonderful answers back. And in fact, I followed them up. So I do want to put a post on thanking people for their generosity. But that's the kind of thing that happens. One of the things that they posted was this 1 month free residency at a place called Playa. And you had to enter a book into this competition in Bend, Oregon, and the winner would get this residency. So I thought, oh, I don't know what this Playa is, but I'm going to look it up. And I looked it up and it was amazing. So I thought, all right, I'm going to set myself to doing an artist book and win this prize, which I have to tell you, I didn't win the prize. But anyway, here's the book that came out of that. And the book is What the Forest Knows. And anybody who was at Propeller Gallery in the last little while might have seen this because it was exhibited as part of the Old Growth exhibition that they held. This is a double accordion. It's etching. And then on top, it's silkscreen. So what I'm doing here is writing a legend. Again, it's another made up legend I've come up with that talks about the forest knowing things that maybe we all don't know. But I use the ghost plants as a metaphor for environmental awareness. And in part of the story, I talk about how, only those who really look can see them and know what they're seeing. And if they try to touch them, they turn black, wither, and die, which in fact, they actually do turn black, wither, and die. I've always loved finding these plants in the forest. I feel like it's a real honor when I come across them. What I didn't know until I started doing all the research for this book was that in fact, native people from all across North America where they grow used to dig them up, dry the roots, and make a powder out of the root that they used as a sedative. And they specifically used it for people in mourning. And these plants do look like people in mourning. So I felt there was a really interesting connection here. But that's the idea behind the book. Only those who know what the forest knows can see what the forest can see. So that was kind of that book. And I was pretty pumped because I first exhibited it at Grimsby in this Forest in the Trees exhibition that included my other collagraphs. And then it was accepted into the artists' books about the environment down at the San Francisco Center for the Book. And most recently, as I said, at Propeller Gallery. So that's the book, but I'm going to now show you some of the process pictures. All right. So this is me at Open Studio. It's like, when I was doing this, it was like the middle of July. There was no air conditioning. This was brutal. But what I did was I took one of the Japanese tissues and I had silk screened the text, my original prose, in cursive handwriting. I had done it onto this paper as a silk screen. And you can see on the left-hand side, you can see where there's a little bit of black just underneath my left hand. And when you look at the picture on the right, you can see the paper becoming transparent, and you still see the writing on the left, but you begin to see the writing on the right emerge. So that's how I had the black ink for the one side and the white ink for the other side. And I didn't know if this would work. This was pure, like, by chance and by golly type stuff, but I thought it might work. And in fact, I'll go back so you can, now you might have a more of an understanding of the process. So you'll see the sides that are white and the sides that are black, but that's all that Japanese tissue. And you can see it has little ghostly flecks in it. So I was really, really excited that it actually was working. And I have to say, I don't know, Stu, if you're listening, but I owe you a big one on this, because I remember taking sort of a maquette of this into the cabbage bindery when we were on Ward Street and saying, I don't know about using this cursive handwriting. I think maybe it's a little too, and you said, no, that really works. And I listened, and thank you. I think it was really sage advice. So once again, you helped me out, Stu. So this is a process picture. The left-hand side, you see that piece that has had the encaustic wax put on it. You'll notice where I have marked off the edge of the page, and you'll notice on the tissue where I made sure no encaustic wax went, because I knew that there's no way I could get it to adhere itself to the Somerset if there was wax on it. So I was really careful about that. I was able to glue it. When I assembled the book in, I did it as 2 pages, and in the middle there, I found what was most effective was to just do like a pamphlet stitch to keep the 2 parts of the double accordion together. And of course, there's the cover, and it's on lovely book cloth from Stu. Not to give him too many embarrassing moments here, but you can see how nicely that hand screen printed text worked. Again, these were just all experiments, and I didn't know if they'd work or not. And this represents ages of trying to put everything together, because first you have to write the text, which like it's very, very difficult for me anyway. And then I had to come up with the imagery, and it just, at one point you say, why am I bothering it? And then the next moment you say, oh my God, this is actually going to work, and it's going to be great. So, you know, and so that's how these things happen. So I talked about Playa, you know, how I wanted to win a 1-month residency there. I didn't, my book didn't win, but it was on exhibit in Bend, Oregon for a month. And then I thought, well, why don't you just apply? So I did apply, and I was given a 1-month fully funded residency. The National Endowment for the Arts was part of the funding body, the Oregon Trust, the Ford Family Foundation. I was absolutely astounded when I was accepted. It is up in the high desert. It's a 6-mile lake that dries up in the summer. And I chose to go in September because I wanted to go when it really was at its most desert-like. What I ended up discovering was, you know, reinforcing, not discovering, the importance of water to life and to my practice. And what you're seeing is the view from my cabin. I had this gorgeous 2-story cabin, and that was the upper deck. And because there is water there, because originally it was built as a hunting lodge, and they put in this little oasis. So I'd been doing migratory marsh bird monitoring in the Rouge all summer, and with very limited success. Of course, all the birds I was looking for were here in Playa. It was really funny. But anyway, so this was Playa. And excuse me, I need a sip of water.
So Liz, the other thing I'll tell you is that we're at about 7:42 right
Okay,
now.
then
So
I have to
keep
really
talking,
get
no
to it.
problem. But
Okay,
yeah.
So I chose to work in Sheena Wood again because McLean's, who I mentioned as the supplier for those who are interested, they are in Oregon. So I did wood cuts, I did collagraphs. You can see the studio there. And that's one of the artist books that came out of that. And that was just the top part of the one plate. Excuse me. This is more of the process pictures of that. When I came home, I started to really play with the idea of water and print. Oh, sorry, I have to cough again. And I want you to see the blue parts that are indigo dyed kozo. We did those in a cabbage play day back at Ward. So they found a good home. I'm so sorry. All right, and that's the way I have to lay things out to start to tell the story. Sorry. Airplanes and me, I get really sick these days. I think everyone does. Anyway, the next book I came up with was One Step at a Time. again, it's that method of reduction woodcut. You'll see the familiar playa imagery there in the top left-hand piece of wood. You'll see where there's some of the imagery from the pond, which was done at PBI a couple of years earlier. But this is the book in the right-hand corner. You see different views of the same book. And this is how that worked out. And again, it's that absolutely exquisite Japanese kozo paper. And it does show through, but it was a really nice thing to marry the indigo dyed paper that we did that day, which was so much fun, with these woodcuts. So the next thing was Kami Ito and Shifu. And this is, Kami Ito is spinning handmade paper into thread, and Shifu is weaving handmade paper thread. So the top left-hand corner is the cover of the book, which is a weaving. And Velma Boyard, she taught this to me, and she calls it North Country Shifu, because it's a little rougher than the Shifu that you will see done very finely by Japanese craftspeople. And so I did the cover, and then I thought, oh, I really like knitting. I'm going to try to knit with this. So as a result, my next few books were knitted Shifu. So, you know, there's just so many ways of playing and making books. So then, of course, I found another scrap of copper, and I etched butterflies, and in the different stages of their evolution, but they're all butterflies. I do monarch butterfly tagging, so I'm used to looking at different butterflies and their condition. And I did that, and I thought, what can I do that's a little different here? And I thought, well, maybe I could print on milkweed paper. I thought, well, how would I know how to make milkweed paper? Well, Amy Lee is an American Hanji specialist who just happened to have published a little pamphlet on how to make milkweed paper. And the first thing she says is you mustn't harvest until after the first full moon in September, because up until that time, the butterflies are relying on the plant. So I harvested a whole bunch of milkweed, and then I went to a woman who actually was living in Sutton, but she's moved to I think about Belleville area now, Joanne Hang. And I spent a day making milkweed paper. So you can see me making it. You can see it drying on my dining room window. And the next page shows the butterfly book. And this is all handmade milkweed paper. Only thing on this that isn't milkweed paper is the book board. But otherwise, everything is done with this handmade paper. And the only thing you use to give it body is okra. So you just juice an okra overnight, and it's that gelatinous mix that is the binder for that paper. So I'm still making that book. The ones that I've made I've already sold, so I have to get some more made, but that's a really lovely little project. Next, I had taken echo dyeing with Rebecca Chambly. She's from California. That was at PBI as well. And she made this really interesting book with all these different signatures using the echo dyed paper. But I had a little bit left over. And somebody said to me, oh, Liz, you should do the, the Brooklyn Library Project. And they're these itsy bitsy books. And so I decided to go ahead with it. And I took the cover that they sent and took the interior out and used my own. And this is just this echo dyed paper that I just started to play with. And I thought, okay, what might Fibonacci's muse have been? And I decided it was shapes and trajectories, but also nature-based. So that was that little book. So this next picture shows the same echo dyed paper that I did with Rebecca. And this is something, I'm sure we all do this. When I've got something and I don't quite know what to do it, I just hang it up and let it be. And what happened was the longer it stayed up there, the more I started to see interesting patterns. And so I took it down and I was looking through books for a structure that might interest me. And I found this structure in Alyssa Golden's Making Handmade Books. And I highly recommend that book. It's a great resource for all sorts of things. And so I made my first cut, and then I started to stitch. And I ended up with this book that it's really, I quite love it. And it was made during the pandemic. So it's got sort of a little more to it. in meaning for me personally than it might otherwise have had. And then you can't make just one. So I did another one. So this one is even more sort of pandemic related because I started to think about things like coughing and graphs and, you know, multiples and all these sorts of things. But I started to play with more stitching, more cutting. And in fact, this one is actually larger than the other one and more complex. But again, these are just things. This one is contact printing where I used all natural stuff from my own backyard. I did get into a lot of ink making and dyeing during the pandemic. And so I was playing with all these sorts of things. And again, it's, you know, a nice little book. So the final picture, am I okay, Carrie, on time? The final picture is a book arts exhibition. This was such a nice exhibition. This was in Spain, Santander, Spain. It was the Impact 11 printmaking conference. And, you know, I took my What the Forest Knows and one step at a time and the pond and a couple of other things. And it really, I felt it made such a nice presentation that I just thought, oh, I'll just show you this picture of it in situ. And then the final picture is just a little eye candy, just because we all need eye candy. But those are the things I use when I'm doing the contact printing and echo dyeing. So there. So should I go back to another?
Excellent. Yeah.
Okay. So close this, or what would you like, Carrie?
Yeah. You're gonna don't no more sharing your screen.
Okay.
Then we'll go back to okay. So I'm just going to ask everybody if they've got questions to put them in the chat. So far, someone has asked if you would be willing to put together an email with the teachers and resources that you have mentioned.
Sure.
Yeah. So we can do that after the
talk, and like, for example,
yeah.
If anybody really wants to take classes with Karen Kunk, she has a studio in Nebraska, and you can go out for a week and she'll teach you.
Right.
And she's great.
Yeah. Okay. Lots of thank yous.
Oh,
thank you for sharing your process. Great talk, beautiful work.
Oh, thank you.
So far, no questions.
Okay.
But that might be because you covered everything so beautifully.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Here's one. When using thin paper, what are tips for when you're using thin paper and you don't want to see through things?
Okay. I'm not exactly sure I understand the question. So
Francis, can you maybe clarify a little bit? You can unmute yourself if you want.
I'm trying to see if I have something here I can show. This is the same book that that Sigurd was showing you, and this is not a transparent paper, but I could have made it transparent, but chose not to. So that paper that I used in the book about Daphne paper. I don't know Daphne paper. I'm not familiar with it. Yeah, so I use Daphne handmade paper, but for lino cuts, but the oil-based inks bleed through a lot. Okay. I have, you know what? Ask Francis to please contact me, and I'll try and sort this out, because I really don't know. It's like Kozo, but who is it? Is it a handmade paper? Yes, she says. Okay. Oh, are you talking about paper made out of the Daphne plant? Is that what we're talking about? Yes. Okay. I haven't made paper out of Daphne plant, and I haven't worked with paper that was. So if something was bleeding through, then you could try. There's a couple of things you could try. You could try putting a sizing on it, and that would keep the ink on the surface somewhat. But you also might try to make your ink more opaque. So it's kind of tricky, but I'd be really happy to email back and forth if I can in any way shed any light on that. But I feel like I'm out of my depth because I don't really know what the paper is and what ink you're using other than oil-based. And I use oil-based inks a lot. I also use water wash up. So I use lots of different things.
Okay,
Does that help at all?
Yeah, she's saying thanks.
Okay. Yeah, please email me, Francis. I'd love to talk.
Then we have a question. I've been trying to make accordions and have a very hard time lining things up. Is there any advice you might have?
Accordions drive me nuts. I don't know why I keep making them. Okay. The first thing you have to do if you're making an accordion that's not tipped into another structure is to make sure that your paper grain is taken care of. And these are all the things I didn't have a clue about. I had to learn all this. Thank God for cabbage. You know, you have to make sure it's the paper grain, because if it isn't what I would call true, if it's just off a little bit, you will a myriad of problems. So that being said, this is probably, and this is something Karen recommended, this is probably one of my favorite tools. And so whenever I'm doing pages for a book like my color woodcut books, I make sure that all the pages, the grain is running the right way and that they are all properly cut before I even begin, because otherwise I don't stand a chance. Does that answer your question? Yes, no, maybe? I'm just trying to see if I have something else here.
Her answer is it's almost.
Almost. Okay. What am I missing in terms of an explanation? Is she doing an accordion that she folds it first and then tips in the images, or an accordion like this where each sheet is the accordion? And you can see from the back where the joins are. Because if this is the kind of book she's doing, then this is where you really have to make sure an accordion where the images are, I can't see the whole thing.
Are there first. So she's printing and then folding, it sounds like.
This is what you need, in my opinion, if I understand you correctly. You need to use one of these to make sure that you're following the grain and that your pages are true. Because otherwise it's I don't even know how to make it work. This is the only way I know. Does that help?
I'm going to also pump Cabbage Education because our next online workshop is about hinging accordions.
There you go.
So
well, and
that's
just
a possibility.
You know, this is the method that Karen uses. Okay, and what I do is I take a little bit of the same paper as I used, so that it's all the same paper. So you're not dealing with different weights and all that sort of stuff. And that's how it works. I would love to be able to take a piece that has the printing on it, because then it would be the same coloration, but then it wouldn't adhere because, you know, just as was mentioned, oil-based inks, I don't think you could rely on an oil-based ink adhering properly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think she seems, yeah. So then someone asked about purchasing your artist books.
Oh.
Where are you selling them, or?
Yeah, I sell them. I do sell them. In fact, that was why most of this talk was slides, because most of them have been sold. Mm-hmm. I have this one. But I'm doing, I will be at the Japanese paper. You can email me privately too. Don't hesitate. But I will also be at the Japanese paper place in December. There's a washi sale. And I'm also doing the Bound Book Arts Fair down at the Arts and Letters Club in December as well. So I will have all the different things available there. But if there's something specific you had in mind, let me know. And I can either bring the things or, send you images, and you can, if you live out of town.
Okay, so then someone's asking about ways to expand your practice through finding teachers and opportunities for residencies. What kind of advice would you have?
Well, put on your armor if you're going to apply to residencies, because they're very difficult to get into. Have a thick skin. Because as I say, I made that whole book. It's 81 inches long. It's this high. And in fact, what the juror for my What the Forest Knows, at PBI, they encourage you to bring some of your work along for a bit of a show and tell. And I set it out on the table, and it was Laura Russell. And she said to me, "Oh my God, I had no idea that your book was like this. This is phenomenal." So I didn't get in, which was fine. But I did end up getting accepted to Playa anyway. So there's good news and there's not so good news. So keep your eye open. I've heard about residencies through the Book Arts listserv. And you'll hear, like, if I'm on Amy Lee's email list. There was a residency in Mexico I was accepted into, but then, COVID, and I said, no, I'm not going. So you just have to keep your ear to the ground. I encourage anybody to apply to Paper and Book Intensive if you're interested. Might be tough to get into this year because it hasn't run for 3 years. And those of us who had acceptance the year COVID hit, we've been guaranteed we'll get in again. Doesn't mean everybody's going to want to go, though. So that's a good opportunity. Haystack also, Penland, they offer courses. These are all the things I've learned from my printmaking conferences and things I've done just out there. So with respect to Book Arts opportunities in Canada, I can't speak to any specifically because we're so small compared to other countries in terms of population. So it's just what it is. I can't think of anywhere with a Book Arts residency. Do you know of any, Carrie?
I suspect they'll grow up as we have more book art centers opening. So there's one now at McGill, there's one at Carleton.
True.
There's
Good
one
point.
at Calgary. So
Yep.
it's
Yep.
growing. It's just I don't know of anything off the top of my head. So another question is asking about your triangle tool.
Yes.
And where did you get that from?
Paper and Book Intensive. I'm sorry. But this is what the package looks like.
Okay. I have seen them at Above Ground Arts too.
Yes.
Yeah. But I don't, since people are coming from all over the country. Yeah. And Above Ground is in Toronto. So
exactly. So that's why I want to make sure that, everybody has access to all these things. There's a Stu is wonderful in terms of the products he sells.
Yeah.
I would ask Stu if he carries them, because he's often willing to bring things in for people. He's very generous. And
I'll
if
put the link to his, he's not.
Okay.
But I'll put the link to his.
Oh, listen, I tell you, one of my favorite tools from Stu. So if anybody wants a decent scalpel, I use these a lot in my practice, and these are from Stu. They're great. I'm sorry, I see little things coming across the top, and I'm sorry, I can't read them because I'm trying to answer.
No worries. I think there was lots of discussion of the triangle that got people excited.
Perfect. I'll tell you another really good tool. If I can find them. Teflon bone folders. I don't know if Stu carries these. You know where I bought it. But the collector's edition of my Nature of the River book, there was a woman in that class. Her name escapes me now. Julie. And luckily I didn't know who she was, because we really hit it off. We had a lovely time, and she recommended these, and like she's just so low key and so lovely. she is a Harvard book arts professor, and I didn't know it till I got home. And thank goodness, because I would have been tongue tied. But anyway, she recommended the Teflon because it doesn't leave a mark. Ah, okay. So the person that sells stuff at PBI is Colophon, and she's out of the States. It's Mary. I bought stuff from her. Like I bought a hammer for my milkweed paper and stuff like that. She does ship to Canada. What you need to do is really watch the duty that you can get dinged with. And it's not up to Mary. That's just our crazy border control stuff sometimes. But Colophon, if Stu doesn't carry it. So I hope people enjoyed this. I hope this was fun. Colophon for Colophon for the Teflon folder. And if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me.
Yeah, Liz's email will be, when I send the email around with the link, I'll make sure she's on there prominently. So yeah.
And I have a website, lizmenard.ca, and on Instagram, I'm printmaker Liz. So if you want to see why I have such a bad cold, you can see all my Moroccan pictures.
Okay. So anybody last questions? Last call for any questions, or anybody I didn't find in the chat? I think I saw everybody.
And if anybody said hi and I didn't say it back, please excuse.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, hi, Amy. I'm glad you like my travel photos.
Okay, so I think everybody seems pretty happy and had their
Good.
questions answered.
Good.
We will, like I said, I'll send an email around with a link to the recording, and I will share the chat because we had some links in there. So yeah,
Okay.
people can see that too. So
Brilliant.
I'll just put that in the email. So I think that's just, thank you so much to Liz for inspiring us all and sharing her genius with us and putting this all together. And it was fun to work with her to organize it. And I hope this inspires some of you folks that showed up to maybe propose a similar kind of evening exploring your work too. We're happy to have more of this kind of fun stuff. Yeah, so thanks everybody.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording and I'll end everything and we'll say goodbye to everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Carrie.